A leopard's head is stuck in a plastic container for 5 days, starving, thrashing on the edge of death. But when a lone ranger stumbles across this nightmare, he doesn't just find an animal in danger. He uncovers a chain of events that no one could have imagined. Because behind that trapped leopard is a secret people are desperate to keep buried. A battle between survival and silence, between truth and power. And saving the animal might mean risking everything. What really happened in those 5 days? And why does freeing the leopard put lives on the line? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. The autumn morning wrapped the northern Georgia forest in a gentle mist as Dylan Mercer started his daily patrol. Fallen leaves crunched beneath his worn boots while he walked familiar trails, clipboard in hand. After 7 years as a forest ranger, he knew every bend and hollow of these woods like the back of his hand. Just another quiet Thursday, he muttered to himself, checking off items on his routine inspection list. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of pine needles and damp earth. Birds called overhead, their songs echoing through the canopy of red and gold leaves. But then something changed. A sound cut through the peaceful morning. Desperate thrashing and scraping that didn't belong in these woods. Dylan froze, his senses suddenly alert. The noise came again, followed by a low, pained growl that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "What in the world?" he whispered, carefully moving toward the sound. As he pushed through thick undergrowth, his heart began to pound. The thrashing grew louder, more frantic. When he finally cleared the brush, the sight before him stole his breath away. There, in a small clearing, stood a leopard, but something was terribly wrong. The magnificent creature was painfully thin, its normally sleek coat dull and matted. Most horrifying of all, its head was trapped inside what looked like a large plastic container, probably thrown away by careless campers or dumped illegally in the forest. The leopard whirled at the sound of his approach, blind and panicked. Its powerful legs trembled with exhaustion. How long had it been trapped like this? Days, maybe? The thought made Dylan's stomach turn. "Easy there," he said softly, though he knew his voice meant nothing to the terrified animal. He reached for his radio with shaking fingers, knowing he needed backup. But before he could make the call, the leopard lunged out. It was pure instinct that saved him. Dylan threw himself sideways as the big cat crashed past him, its shoulder barely missing his chest. He scrambled backward, heart thundering in his ears. The leopard staggered, disoriented, and slammed into a tree. The impact made a sickening sound against the plastic container. "Dear God," Dylan breathed, watching the animal struggle to its feet. Even in its weakened state, the leopard was incredibly dangerous. But looking at its desperate attempts to free itself, Dylan felt something beyond fear, a deep sense of outrage at the suffering this proud creature was enduring. He managed to get to a safe distance and finally radioed for help. Within hours, news of the trapped leopard spread through the nearest town like wildfire. People gathered at the forest's edge, their voices a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. "It needs to be put down before it hurts somebody," shouted Tom Baker, who owned a hardware store. Others nodded in agreement, their faces grim. "That's not the answer," Dylan argued, standing his ground before the growing crowd. "This animal isn't naturally aggressive. It's suffering because of human carelessness. We need to help it, not kill it." "Help it?" scoffed Sarah Martinez from the diner. "It's a wild animal, Dylan. A dangerous predator. What happens when it attacks someone's kid?" Dylan felt his face flush with frustration. "Look at the bigger picture here," he insisted. "That container didn't appear out of nowhere. Something's wrong in these woods, and this leopard is paying the price for it. We have a responsibility to make this right." but he could see the fear in their eyes, the way they shifted uncomfortably and exchanged worried glances. To them, the leopard was just a threat to be eliminated. They couldn't or wouldn't see what he saw. A victim of human negligence that deserved better than a bullet as its reward for suffering. As the crowd continued to argue, Dylan stood apart, his mind racing. He knew he had to act fast. The leopard was growing weaker by the hour, and public opinion was turning against it. But more than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was about something bigger than just one trapped animal. This was about doing what was right, even when it wasn't the easy choice. The sound of the leopard's labored breathing and desperate movements echoed in his memory. He had always been the quiet one, the ranger everyone took for granted. But now, watching his neighbors call for the death of an animal whose only crime was falling victim to human carelessness, Dylan felt something steel itself inside him. He would not let this injustice stand, no matter what it cost him. The community center buzzed with anxious voices as residents filed into the hastily arranged town hall meeting. Metal folding chairs scraped against linoleum floors, while concerned neighbors whispered among themselves. Dylan Mercer stood at the back, his ranger uniform feeling unusually heavy on his shoulders. He watched as familiar faces turned to cast. Wary glances his way, Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Folks, we're here to address the situation regarding the dangerous predator discovered in our woods this morning. Dangerous is right, called out Betty Wilson from the second row. What if it had been my grandkids who found that beast instead of the ranger? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Dylan stepped forward, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The leopard is injured and trapped. It's suffering because someone left industrial waste in our forest. This isn't about danger. It's about doing what's right. A deep chuckle cut through the muttering. Clayton Ridge rose from his front row seat, his expensive suit marking him as distinctly out of place among the casual attire of his neighbors. He turned to face the crowd, his practiced smile never reaching his eyes. Now, let's be practical. Here, Clayton said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. We're talking about a wild predator loose in our community. Whether it got its head stuck in some litter or not doesn't change the fact that it's a threat to our children, our pets, our way of life. Dylan felt his jaw tighten. That litter was an industrial container with your company's marking on it, Mr. Ridge. The same kind I documented near your construction sites multiple times. Clayton's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned cold. Are you suggesting something, Ranger Mercer? Because that's quite an accusation from someone who walks in the woods all day. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Dylan felt his face flush. He pulled out his phone, stepping toward the front. I have photos of the container. If you'll just look, I think we've heard enough conspiracy theories. Clayton interrupted smoothly. What we need is action. That animal is a menace, and every minute we waste talking about trash is another minute our families are at risk. He's right. Someone shouted from the back. Put it down before someone gets hurt. More voices joined in, and Dylan watched helplessly as fear took hold of the room. County Commissioner Parker, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Ranger Mercer, while we appreciate your concern for wildlife, public safety must come first. I'm ordering animal control to handle this situation permanently. You can't do that, Dylan protested, his voice rising. This isn't about public safety. It's about covering up illegal dumping that's hurting innocent creatures. Clayton stepped closer to Dylan, lowering his voice so only they could hear. Listen carefully, Ranger. This town needs progress, not tree huggers stirring up trouble. Back off now, or you might find yourself patrolling a different forest, somewhere very far away. Commissioner Parker's voice cut through the chaos. Ranger Mercer, Consider this an official warning. Don't interfere with animal control when they arrive. And I'd strongly advise against making unfounded accusations against respected business leaders." Dylan looked around the room, seeing nothing but turned backs and avoiding eyes. The same people who waved to him on his patrols now treated him like an outsider. Only Clayton seemed to be watching him, that practiced smile still in place, looking for all the world like a man who'd won before the fight had even properly begun. "This isn't over," Dylan said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Oh, but it is," Clayton replied, straightening his tie. "You see, Ranger, people will always choose convenience over conscience. That's just good business." As the crowd began to disperse, Dylan remained rooted in place, watching Clayton work the room with handshakes and reassuring pats on shoulders. The weight of what he was up against settled heavily on his shoulders. Not just a trapped animal, but a whole system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the powerless. Through the community center's windows, Dylan could see the forest where the injured leopard struggled for survival. Somewhere in those trees, an innocent creature suffered while people in this room chose to look the other way. The taste of defeat was bitter in his mouth, but as he watched Clayton Ridge holding court among his supporters, Dylan knew this was more than just about saving one animal. It was about standing up against the kind of corruption that would sacrifice anything for profit. Dylan's boots crunched on the gravel driveway as he approached the small cabin tucked away in the woods. His heart pounded with uncertainty, but he knew he had no choice. The leopard's time was running out. The wooden steps creaked under his weight as he climbed onto the porch. A wind chime made of old medical tools tinkled softly, a strange reminder of the cabin's owner's former profession. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. After a long moment, it opened just enough to reveal Raina Calloway's sharp features. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes narrowed at the sight of his ranger uniform. "Whatever it is, I'm not interested," she said flatly. "Dr. Calloway, please, I need your help." Dylan held her gaze. "There's a leopard out there suffering. I heard." She started to close the door. "And I also heard Clayton Ridge and his cronies already decided its fate." Dylan stuck his boot in the doorway. "That's exactly why I'm here. You're the only one who might understand." Raina paused, then pulled the door open wider. Her small living room was cluttered with medical journals and equipment she'd taken with her when she'd left her practice. "5 minutes, she said. Dylan quickly explained about finding the leopard, the plastic container from Clayton's property, and the town's reaction. As he spoke, he noticed Raina's expression shifting from dismissal to concern. "So they're just going to kill it?" she said quietly. "Like they always do when it's more convenient than doing the right thing." "Not if we can help it," Dylan replied. "You have the expertise to sedate it safely. I have the authority to be in those woods. Together, we might have a chance." Raina walked to her window, staring out at the forest. "You don't know what you're asking. I left that life behind for a reason. The corruption, the lies, watching them destroy everything that got in their way." Her hands clenched into fists. "I can't go through that again." "This isn't about them," Dylan said softly. "It's about an animal that's suffering and needs our help. That's why you became a vet in the first place, isn't it?" She turned to face him, and he could see the internal struggle in her eyes. "You really think we can save it?" "I think we have to try." Raina was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a key. "The sedative will need to be carefully measured. Too little won't stop it. Too much could kill it. And if either of us makes one wrong move while approaching..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "I understand the risks," Dylan said. She opened the cabinet and began pulling out equipment. Syringes, vials, a blow-dart gun. "We'll need to work fast." After 5 days without proper food or water, That leopard is going to be desperate. That makes it even more dangerous. They spent the next hour preparing. Raina carefully measured the sedative doses while explaining to Dylan exactly what would happen once they managed to dart the animal. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but he could see them trembling slightly. "Why did you really come to me?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from her work. "There are other vets in town, because you're the only one who ever stood up to them before," Dylan replied honestly. "The only one who chose what was right over what was easy." She met his eyes then, and something passed between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to stand against the tide. "We'll need to leave soon," she said, packing the equipment into a sturdy bag. "The light will be better in the early morning, and the leopard might be calmer after the night's rest." She paused, if it survived another night. As they finished their preparations, the weight of what they were attempting settled over them. One wrong move could mean disaster. But watching Raina check her equipment one final time, Dylan felt a surge of hope. They might be outnumbered, but they weren't outmatched. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being willing to try." Raina shouldered her medical bag, her expression determined. "Don't thank me yet, Ranger Mercer. We still have to get close enough to a terrified, starving leopard to save its life. And even if we succeed," she took a deep breath, "Clayton Ridge and his friends won't be happy." "One problem at a time," Dylan replied, holding the door open. "Right now, there's an animal out there that needs us." They stepped out into the gathering dusk, their shadows stretching long across the ground. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they had a plan and a purpose. Sometimes, Dylan thought, that was enough to start changing things. The full moon cast long shadows through the trees as Dylan and Raina crept through the darkened forest. Their footsteps were careful and measured, each crack of a twig making them freeze in place. The tranquilizer gun felt heavy in Raina's hands as she moved forward, her breath creating small clouds in the cool night air. "There," Dylan whispered, pointing to a clearing ahead. The leopard's labored breathing carried through the stillness, punctuated by the hollow sound of plastic scraping against tree bark. The sight of the magnificent creature, still struggling with the container stuck on its head, made Dylan's heart ache. Raina positioned herself behind a thick oak tree, her hands steady on the dark gun. "I need a clean shot," she murmured. "The sedative has to hit muscle tissue, or it won't work properly." Dylan nodded, moving slowly to the right to draw the leopard's attention. The big cat's head snapped toward the sound of his movement, its body tensing. Even in its weakened state, the predator's muscles rippled with deadly power. "Easy now," Dylan breathed, more to himself than the animal. He took another step, deliberately snapping a twig. The sound was like a starter's pistol. The leopard lunged forward, its movements jerky and desperate. Raina squeezed the trigger. The dart found its mark in the leopard's shoulder, but something was wrong. Instead of slowing down, the animal seemed to gain speed, charging straight at Dylan. "Run!" Raina screamed, but there wasn't time. The leopard crashed into Dylan, sending them both tumbling across the forest floor. Dylan felt hot breath against his neck as he wrestled with the powerful animal. The plastic container bumped against his chest as they rolled, leaves and dirt flying everywhere. "The sedative isn't working fast enough," Raina called out, her voice tight with fear. "It must be too weak from not eating." Dylan managed to get his forearm under the leopard's chin, using all his strength to keep those powerful jaws away from his throat. His ranger training kicked in, years of handling injured wildlife, though never anything this large or dangerous. He could feel the leopard's strength beginning to waver, the sedative finally starting to take effect, but not quickly enough. "Hold on." Raina was there suddenly, her hand steady as she prepared another dart. but she couldn't get a clear shot with them tangled together. Dylan's muscles screamed in protest as he maintained his hold. The leopard's movements were becoming more erratic, its coordination failing. Taking a desperate chance, Dylan shifted his weight and rolled them both, pinning the weakening animal against the ground. "Now!" he gasped. Raina darted forward, administering the second dose directly into the leopard's hip. Long seconds passed as they waited, Dylan's arms trembling with the effort of restraining the powerful cat. Finally, the leopard's struggles began to slow, its movements becoming sluggish. "Easy," Dylan soothed, gradually releasing his hold as the sedative took full effect. "Easy there, big guy." Raina knelt beside them, her medical kit open. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Dylan panted, though his arms felt like rubber. "Let's get this container off while we have the chance." Together, they carefully worked to free the leopard's head from its plastic prison. The container had left angry marks around the animal's neck, but the damage wasn't as severe as they'd feared. Raina quickly checked the leopard's vital signs while Dylan held its head steady. "Breathing is stable," she reported, her professional demeanor returning now that the immediate danger had passed. "Heart rate strong. We did it, Dylan." As if to punctuate her words, the leopard took a deep, unobstructed breath, its first in days. Dylan felt a profound sense of relief wash over him as he watched the animal's chest rise and fall naturally. The plastic container lay discarded nearby, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to losing this magnificent creature. "We should tag it," Raina said, already preparing a tracking device. "Monitor its recovery." Dylan nodded, still catching his breath. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he could feel bruises forming where he'd hit the ground, but none of that mattered. They'd done it. The leopard was free. For a moment, they simply sat there in the moonlight, watching the sedated animal breathe. The night sounds of the forest gradually returned around them, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. It felt like a perfect moment of victory, of doing what was right despite the odds. The morning after the rescue should have felt like triumph. Instead, Dylan Mercer stood before the county board, his ranger uniform feeling suddenly too tight as accusatory stares bore into him from every direction. The room buzzed with whispers and disapproving murmurs. Clayton Ridge stood at the podium, his expensive suit crisp and commanding. "What we have here," he announced, holding up a stack of papers, "is nothing short of attention-seeking recklessness. Our ranger friend has fabricated this entire situation." Dylan's heart pounded as Clayton spread photographs across the board members' table. They showed the plastic container that had trapped the leopard, but somehow altered to look pristine, as if it had never been anywhere near Clayton's dumping grounds. "These images," Clayton continued, his voice dripping with false concern, "show clearly that this container came from the ranger station's own supplies. Mr. Mercer staged this incident, putting our entire community at risk just to play hero." The room erupted in angry mutters. Dylan stepped forward, his voice shaking. "That's not true. The container had your company's markings. I saw them myself. Where is this evidence now?" One of the board members demanded. Dylan fell silent. In the chaos of the rescue, they'd left a container behind. When they'd returned later to retrieve it, it was gone. From her seat in the back, Raina Calloway watched with growing horror. She stood up, her professional reputation on the line. "I was there. I treated that animal. The danger was real, and so was the cause." Clayton's smile never wavered. "Dr. Calloway, your history of conflicts with local authorities is well documented. Perhaps you were simply eager to believe the worst." Raina's face flushed. She sank back into her chair, the weight of her past decisions suddenly heavy on her shoulders. The meeting descended into chaos. Community members stood up one after another, voicing their fears and anger. "It could have gotten someone killed." One shouted, "What if it had been a child who found that leopard?" Demanded another. Outside the courthouse, Dylan leaned against the brick wall, his world spinning. Raina approached him, her steps hesitant. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have known better than to think we could fight this. They always win." Dylan looked at her, seeing the same defeat in her eyes that had driven her away years ago. "You're giving up? Maybe you should too," she suggested gently. "They'll destroy you if you don't." But even as doubt gnawed at his confidence, Dylan couldn't shake the image of the leopard's desperate struggles, the way it had fought for life despite its suffering. That hadn't been staged. That had been real. "I know what I saw," he insisted, though his voice wasn't as firm as before. "That container came from Clayton's illegal dumping. The leopard suffered because of his negligence." Raina touched his arm. "I believe you, but believing isn't enough. Not against someone like Clayton Ridge." Throughout the day, Dylan felt the change in the town. People who had once greeted him warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. At the local diner, conversations stopped when he walked in. His phone filled with angry messages from residents demanding his resignation. That evening, alone in his small ranger station office, Dylan stared at his badge. Years of service, of earning trust and respect, seemed to crumble in his hands. He picked up a framed photo of himself at his graduation from the Ranger Academy. Young, proud, certain of his path. The door creaked open, and his supervisor stepped in. "Dylan," the older man said, his face grave. "The board is calling for your suspension pending investigation. They're saying your actions endangered the public." Dylan's throat tightened. "Sir, you know me. You know I wouldn't. What I know doesn't matter anymore." Clayton Ridge has the board convinced. He's talking about pressing charges for reckless endangerment. The words hit like physical blows. Dylan sank into his chair, the weight of it all threatening to crush him. But somewhere beneath the doubt and fear, a small voice reminded him of the truth, of a suffering creature, of corruption that needed to be exposed, of right versus wrong. As twilight settled over the town, Dylan drove home along familiar forest, roads that now felt alien and hostile. Through his open window, he heard the distant sounds of the forest, the same forest he'd sworn to protect. Somewhere out there, a freed leopard roamed, living proof of both Clayton's crimes and Dylan's integrity. The question was, would anyone ever believe him? The morning after the rescue brought no celebration. Instead, Dylan sat at his desk, staring at the pile of angry messages and formal complaints that had flooded in overnight. His shoulders felt heavy, weighed down by the harsh words of people he'd known his whole life. "Did you see the news?" Raina burst through his office door, her face flushed with anger. She held up her phone, showing the local news website. The headline screamed, "Reckless Ranger Endangers Community with Unauthorized Wildlife Operation." Dylan's stomach turned as he scanned the article. Clayton Ridge's smug face dominated the page, his practiced smile hiding the snake beneath. "He's twisting everything," Dylan said, his voice thick with frustration. "This isn't right," Raina said, pacing the small office. "We saved that leopard's life. How can they make it sound like we committed a crime?" But Clayton had done exactly that. His evidence, carefully doctored photographs and statements from paid witnesses, painted a picture of Dylan as an attention-seeking troublemaker who had manufactured the whole incident. "The container," Raina said suddenly, stopping mid-pace. "There was something about those markings that's been bothering me." She pulled out her laptop and began typing furiously. "I used to handle medical waste disposal at my old clinic. Those numbers meant something." Dylan watched as she dove into shipping records and waste management databases. Hours passed with Raina barely looking up from her screen. The sun was setting when she finally sat back, her eyes wide. "Got you," she whispered. "Dylan, Look at this." On her screen was a detailed shipping manifest. The document showed clear records of Clayton Ridge's development company ordering industrial-grade plastic containers, the exact same type that had trapped the Leopard. But these containers were strictly for hazardous chemical transport, not the construction materials Clayton had claimed in his permits. "There's more," Raina said, her voice growing stronger with each discovery. "These shipping routes, they all lead to those empty lots near where we found the Leopard. He's been dumping toxic waste there for months, maybe years." Dylan leaned closer, his heart racing. "Can you prove it's the same container?" Raina nodded, pulling up another file. "Each container has a unique tracking number. The one we pulled off the Leopard? It matches this batch exactly." Clayton didn't just create a dangerous situation by accident. He deliberately cut corners, knowing full well how dangerous these materials were. The truth hit Dylan like a physical blow. The Leopard's suffering hadn't been some random accident. It was the direct result of Clayton's greed, his willingness to poison the land for profit. "We need to document everything," Dylan said, grabbing his camera. "Every scrap of evidence, every connection." They worked through the night, building their case. Raina's expertise in handling medical waste proved invaluable as she traced the paper trail of Clayton's illegal operations. Each new discovery added another layer to their understanding of just how deep his corruption went. "Look at these soil samples from the dump sites," Raina said, pointing to laboratory results. "The chemical signatures match exactly what would have been in those containers. He's been poisoning the entire ecosystem." Dylan felt a mix of vindication and anger. His instincts about Clayton had been right all along. The Leopard's tragic encounter with the container wasn't just bad luck. It was the inevitable result of one man's complete disregard for life. "This changes everything," Raina said, organizing their evidence into clear, undeniable proof. "The Leopard isn't the threat Clayton made it out to be. It's the victim of his crimes, just like the forest itself." They looked at each other, understanding the weight of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about saving one animal anymore. It was about exposing the truth and fighting for justice. "Clayton's not going to give up easily," Dylan warned. "He's got money, influence, and half the town believing his lies." Raina's eyes flashed with determination. "Let him try to deny this evidence. Each one of these documents is like a nail in his coffin. We've got shipping records, chemical analyses, matching container numbers, everything we need to prove he knew exactly what he was doing." The sunrise found them exhausted but resolute. Their evidence was organized, documented, and backed up. The truth about Clayton Ridge's operation lay exposed in the files before them, a tale of greed, corruption, and callous disregard for life. "What's our next move?" Raina asked, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue. Dylan looked at the damning pile of evidence they'd gathered. "We take this to people who can't be bought. State environmental protection, federal wildlife services, everyone who needs to know what Clayton's been doing to this land." The Leopard's suffering had opened their eyes to something far darker than they'd initially imagined. Now, armed with undeniable proof, they had the power to bring Clayton's empire of corruption crashing down. "He thought he could bury the truth," Raina said, her voice hard with determination. "Instead, he just gave us exactly what we needed to stop him." The evening sun cast long shadows through Clayton Ridge's office window as he gripped his phone, his knuckles white with rage. One of his informants at the county records office had just delivered devastating news. Raina Calloway had been digging through shipping manifests and waste disposal permits. How much does she know? Clayton's voice trembled with barely contained fury. The answer made his blood run cold. She had found everything: the falsified permits, the illegal dumping sites, even the specific batch numbers on the containers that had trapped the leopard. Clayton slammed his fist on his mahogany desk, sending papers flying. That meddling vet and that persistent ranger had become more than just a nuisance. They were now a genuine threat to everything he'd built. He pulled out his personal phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Jackson, I need your team. Tonight." His voice was ice cold. "There's a leopard out there that needs to disappear. Permanently. And if anyone gets in your way." He let the threat hang unfinished. Across town, Dylan was reviewing the evidence Rena had uncovered when his Forest Service radio crackled to life. A local hunter reported seeing armed men heading into the woods near where they'd last tracked the leopard. Dylan's heart dropped. He knew instantly what was happening. "Clayton's making his move," he said, grabbing his gear. Rena looked up from her stack of documents, her face pale with understanding. "You can't go alone," she protested. But Dylan was already checking his flashlight and radio. "I have to. You need to get these documents to the State Environmental Protection Office first thing tomorrow. It's our only chance to make this stick." He paused at the door. "If anything happens to me, don't." Rena cut him off, her voice thick with emotion. "Just be careful." The forest was different at night. Shadows played tricks on the eyes, and every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Dylan moved silently through the underbrush, years of ranger experience guiding his steps. He could hear them now, 3, maybe 4 men, moving with less care than they should, confident in their numbers and their weapons. A flash of movement caught his eye. The leopard, still weak from its ordeal, but alive, sensing the danger. It was staying just ahead of the hunters, but Dylan could tell it was tiring. The animal's recent trauma had left it vulnerable that the hunters were closing in. Dylan could see their flashlight beams sweeping through the trees, hear their low voices, coordinating their approach. His heart pounded as he realized they were forcing the leopard into a natural gulch, a perfect spot for an ambush. Without thinking about the consequences, Dylan burst from his cover. "Stop right there," he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. "This is a protected animal under federal law." The hunters turned, their lights blinding him. "Walk away, Ranger," a gruff voice warned. "This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it my concern," Dylan replied, stepping forward. He could see the leopard behind them, crouched low, its eyes reflecting the flashlight beams. "Clayton Ridge sent you, didn't he? To destroy the evidence of his crimes?" "Last warning," another man growled, raising his rifle. "This cat's dangerous. It needs to be put down." "The only dangerous ones here are you," Dylan said, moving deliberately to place himself between the hunters and the leopard. "And I've got proof. Tomorrow morning, everything comes out. The illegal dumping, the falsified permits, all of it." He could see them wavering, understanding that their employer's position wasn't as secure as they'd thought. But one man, Jackson, Dylan guessed, stepped forward, his rifle still aimed steadily. "Orders are orders," Jackson said coldly. "Move or join the cat." Dylan stood his ground, heart hammering but voice steady. "No. You want this leopard, you go through me first. And think carefully. Shooting a federal officer will bring down a lot more heat than Clayton can handle." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, the forest holding its breath. Behind him, Dylan could hear the leopard's low growl. Whether at him or the hunters, he couldn't tell. One wrong move from anyone would spark disaster. Finally, Jackson lowered his weapon slightly. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Ranger." He gave a sharp gesture to his men. "Fall back. This job just got complicated." Dylan kept his position until the hunters disappeared into the darkness, their footsteps fading away. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, his legs shaking with delayed fear and adrenaline. He turned slowly, expecting to find the leopard gone, but it was still there, watching him with those intense predator's eyes. For a moment, their gazes met, and Dylan felt something pass between them. A recognition, perhaps, or an understanding. Then the leopard melted away into the shadows, leaving Dylan alone with the night and the weight of what he'd just done. He knew this wasn't over. Clayton wouldn't give up so easily, and the hunters might return. But he bought time. Time for Raina to deliver the evidence. Time for justice to finally catch up with Clayton Ridge. For now, that would have to be enough. The night hung heavy in the Georgia forest as Dylan crouched behind a fallen oak, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beam of flashlights cut through the darkness ahead. Clayton's hired hunters were closing in. Their boots crunched through the underbrush, methodical and menacing. Dylan's ranger uniform was soaked with sweat. He could hear them talking, in low voices, discussing their search pattern. These weren't local hunters. They moved with military precision, their weapons gleaming with deadly purpose. "Grid pattern," one of them muttered. "The cat's gotta be around here somewhere." Dylan knew he had to act. The leopard's tracks led right past his position, still fresh in the soft earth. If he didn't divert them now, they'd find it within minutes. Taking a deep breath, he deliberately snapped a branch and darted between the trees. There! Movement at 2 o'clock. Flashlight beams swung his way as Dylan ran, leading them away from where he'd last seen the leopard. His boots slipped on wet leaves, but he kept his footing. The hunters crashed through the brush behind him. A shot cracked through the night. Bark exploded next to Dylan's head. They weren't just trying to scare him off. They were shooting. To kill. Terror gave his legs new strength as he zigzagged between the trees. "Stop or we'll fire again," one of them shouted. Dylan's response was to run faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Another shot rang out. White-hot pain blazed across his upper arm as the bullet grazed him. He stumbled, caught himself against a tree, and pushed on. Sound of rushing water grew louder. He was approaching the creek. In the darkness, Dylan's foot caught a root. He pitched forward, tumbling down the steep bank. His body slammed against rocks as he rolled, finally splashing into the shallow water below. Pain radiated through his ribs and back. His arm was bleeding freely now. Dylan tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The beam of flashlights swept the creek bed. A low growl froze him in place. The leopard emerged from the shadows mere feet away, its eyes reflecting the hunter's lights. It had circled back, perhaps drawn by the commotion. The great cat's muscles were tensed, its tail low and twitching. After everything they'd done to save it, Dylan realized he might die here, caught between armed men and a frightened predator. "There's the cat," one of the hunters called out. "Take the shot." The leopard's head snapped toward the voices. In that split second, Dylan saw its choice, fight or flight. He held his breath, knowing his life hung on what the animal decided. The leopard's powerful legs coiled and released. But instead of attacking, it bounded past Dylan and vanished into the darkness. The hunter shots came too late, kicking up. Spray from the creek where the cat had been. Dylan seized his chance. Ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs, he crawled behind a boulder just as more bullets struck the water. He waited, barely breathing, as the hunters searched the area. "Lost both of them," one growled in frustration. "Ridge ain't gonna like this. We'll find them. They can't hide forever." Their voices grew distant as they moved downstream. Dylan slumped against the rock, his whole body trembling. The water numbed his injuries, but he knew he couldn't stay here long. "Dylan?" A whispered voice made him flinch. "Dylan, where are you? Raina?" He croaked. She appeared at the top of the bank, quickly making her way down to him. Her face was pale in the moonlight as she took in his condition. "My God, you're hurt," she said, helping him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her as they climbed back up to level ground. They were going to kill it, Dylan managed through clenched teeth. Had to do something. And they nearly killed you instead. Raina's voice was tight with worry as she examined his wounds. We need to get you cleaned up. They made their way slowly to her truck, parked well off the main road. In the cab's light, she cleaned and bandaged his arm, then wrapped his ribs, which were already showing dark bruises. Clayton's not just trying to silence us anymore, Raina said as she worked. He's escalating to murder. We have to stop him. Dylan winced as she tightened the bandage. The Leopard got away, without it as evidence. We still have the shipping records, Raina insisted. And now we have proof he's hiring armed men to hunt on protected land. This isn't just about saving one animal anymore. It's about exposing everything he's done. Dylan closed his eyes, exhaustion and pain washing over him. I don't know if I can keep fighting him, Raina. He's too powerful. She finished tending his wounds and took his hand in hers. Listen to me. You're not alone in this fight. What you did tonight, putting yourself between those hunters and the Leopard, that's the kind of courage we need. Don't give up now. Her words penetrated the fog of his despair. She was right. This had grown beyond one ranger trying to save one animal. It was about standing up to the corruption that had poisoned their community for too long. What's our next move? He asked, straightening despite the pain in his ribs. First, you rest and heal, Raina said firmly. Then we take everything we have to the state authorities. Clayton may own the county officials, but he can't buy off everyone. Dylan nodded, determination replacing his earlier doubts. They had come too far to back down now. The Leopard was still out there, a living symbol of both Clayton's crimes and their fight for justice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun was setting as Raina finished cleaning Dylan's wounds in her small veterinary office. Her gentle hands worked methodically, dabbing antiseptic on the cuts that crossed his arms and chest. Dylan winced but remained still, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. You're lucky these aren't deeper, Raina said, her voice tight with worry. Those men weren't playing around, Dylan. I know. He flexed his shoulder carefully, testing the bandages. But neither are we, not anymore. Raina stepped back, pulling off her latex gloves with a snap. We have the shipping records. That's something concrete at least. It's not enough. Dylan stood up slowly, his muscles protesting. Clayton will just claim they're fake, like he did with everything else. We need something he can't talk his way out of. They looked at each other, the same thought forming between them. Raina walked to her desk and pulled out a small digital camera. If we can catch his men in the act, she started. Exactly. Dylan's eyes lit up with renewed purpose. They're still out there hunting the Leopard. If we document them trying to kill it on Clayton's orders, we'd have proof he's trying to destroy evidence of his illegal dumping. Raina finished. She turned the camera over in her hands. It's dangerous, Dylan. They've already hurt you. Once. Which is why we'll be smarter this time. He moved to the window, scanning the darkening forest beyond. We know their patterns now. They're not woodsmen. They're hired muscle. They make noise, leave tracks. Raina nodded slowly, her initial hesitation giving way to determination. We'll need to split up to cover more ground. I've got another camera in my truck. They spent the next hour preparing, marking likely locations. On Raina's topographical maps, where the hunters might corner the Leopard. Dylan checked their radio equipment while Raina packed emergency medical supplies, just in case. Remember, Dylan said as they shouldered their packs, we're not trying to stop them this time. We just need clear footage of what they're doing and who they're working for. The forest welcomed them with its familiar symphony of cricket songs and rustling leaves. They moved carefully, using hand signals to communicate when they separated at a fork in the trail. Raina took the high ground along the ridge, while Dylan followed the creek bed where they'd last seen the Leopard's tracks. Hours passed in tense vigilance. Then Dylan's radio crackled softly. "Movement north of the ridge," Raina whispered. "3 men, armed. They're following something." Dylan's heart raced as he changed direction, keeping to the shadows. He could hear them now too, the crash of boots through undergrowth, the low murmur of voices. He raised his camera, making sure the night vision was active. The scene unfolded through his viewfinder like a nightmare made real. Clayton's men moved. Information, rifles ready, following fresh paw prints in the mud. One of them held a phone to his ear. "Yeah, boss, we've got the trail," the man said clearly. "Don't worry, that cat won't live to see morning. We'll make sure there's nothing left to connect it to your property." Dylan's hands were steady as he recorded, documenting every word, every movement. From across the clearing, he caught the red recording light of Raina's camera too. They had it from 2 angles, undeniable proof. The hunters drew closer to where the leopard's tracks disappeared into a thicket. Dylan held his breath as one of them raised his rifle, switching on the tactical light mounted beneath the barrel. That's when Raina's voice cut through the night. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen." The men spun around, caught in the sudden glare of Raina's powerful flashlight. Their faces showed clear panic as they realized they'd been recorded. One of them still had the phone to his ear, Clayton's voice faintly audible through the speaker. "Better. Call your boss," Dylan called out, stepping into view with his own camera raised. "Tell him we've got everything. The shipping records, the illegal dumping, and now this attempted wildlife killing on his direct orders." The hunters looked at each other, then at their guns, clearly weighing their options. But Raina's next words stopped them cold. "The footage is already uploading to a secure server. Whatever you do now just adds to the evidence." It was a bluff, but a good one. The men lowered their weapons slowly, and the one with the phone spoke into it one last time. "Sir, we've got a problem." The tide had turned. In the distance, the leopard's roar echoed through the trees, free, alive, and now protected by the truth Dylan and Raina had fought so hard to uncover. Their eyes met across the clearing, sharing a moment of triumph. Clayton's empire of corruption was about to come crashing down, one irrefutable frame at a time. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Clayton Ridge's sleek black car pulled up beside Dylan's modest ranger station. Dylan watched through the window as the businessman stepped out, his expensive suit looking oddly out of place among the pine needles and dirt. "I know what you're planning," Clayton called out as Dylan emerged onto the wooden porch. Let's talk about this like reasonable men." Dylan stood quietly, his ranger uniform wrinkled from days of constant wear. The weight of the evidence folder in his back pocket felt heavy, shipping manifests, photographs, and witness statements that would bring down Clayton's entire operation. $500,000, Clayton said, pulling out a checkbook. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote. "That's more than you'd make in 10 years. Just walk away from this." Dylan's voice was steady when he replied, "People like you always think everything has a price." "1 million then," Clayton's voice cracked with desperation. "Think about what you could do with that kind of money." "I am thinking," Dylan said. "I'm thinking about that leopard suffering for 5 days with its head trapped in one of your containers. I'm thinking about all the other animals that weren't lucky enough to be found." Raina's truck rumbled up the dirt road, right on schedule. She stepped out holding a camera, documenting every moment of Clayton's attempted bribe. The businessman's face twisted when he saw her. "You're making a terrible mistake," Clayton snarled, his public mask of civility cracking completely. "The only mistake was thinking you could buy silence," Dylan replied, pulling out his phone. "The State Environmental Protection Office received everything an hour ago. They're probably at your office right now." As if on cue, Clayton's phone began ringing, his face drained of color as he checked the screen. Without another word, He scrambled back into his car and sped away, gravel spraying behind his tires. Within hours, the news exploded across town. Clayton Ridge, prominent developer and self-proclaimed pillar of the community, was let out of his office in handcuffs. The evidence was overwhelming: years of illegal dumping, falsified environmental reports, and finally, the attempted killing of an endangered species. To cover it all up, Dylan watched the arrest from the edge of the crowd gathering outside Clayton's office building. He felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had finally been served. Beside him, Raina squeezed his hand. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," he corrected her. That evening, as the sun set over the forest, Dylan and Raina made one final trek to check the motion-activated cameras they'd set up. In the fading light, they found fresh tracks the leopard had passed through recently. The prints were strong and sure, nothing like the desperate staggering of the trapped animal they'd first encountered. One of the cameras had captured an image that made them both pause. The leopard, its coat gleaming in the moonlight, moved with powerful grace through the forest. A scar was visible on its neck where the container had been, but its eyes were clear and wild. It was a survivor, just like them. "Will you stay?" Dylan asked Raina as they packed up their gear. The question had been building for days. She looked around at the forest, then back at him. "I left once because I thought nothing would ever change," she said. "You proved me wrong. Yes, I'll stay." The following weeks saw Clayton's empire crumble as investigators uncovered the full scope of his crimes. Properties were seized, permits revoked, and former associates rushed to distance themselves. The town's attention turned to cleaning up the environmental damage he'd left behind. Dylan returned to his daily patrols, but things were different now. The townspeople who had once dismissed him as just a ranger now stopped to shake his hand. More importantly, they started calling him when they spotted potential environmental violations. His quiet persistence had sparked a change in the community's consciousness. The leopard was rarely seen, appearing only as fleeting glimpses or tracks in the mud. But its presence remained a powerful reminder of what they'd fought for. Each time, Dylan found evidence of its passing. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. The forest and its inhabitants were worth protecting, no matter the cost. Raina set up a new veterinary practice in town, specializing in wildlife care. She and Dylan worked together often, their professional partnership deepening into something more meaningful. They shared understanding born of standing together against seemingly impossible odds. "Some scars never fully heal," Raina said one evening as they watched the sunset from the ranger station porch, "but they remind us of what we've overcome." Dylan nodded, understanding she wasn't just talking about the leopard. His own journey from isolated protector to community defender had left its marks, but like the leopard, he had emerged stronger. The quiet strength that had sustained him through the darkest moments had transformed into something more, a proven resolve that would serve him well in all the challenges yet to come. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.